They say a drink or two is harmless, that the liver is resilient, a quiet machine that handles whatever is sent its way without complaint. Most people have heard this. Many people believe it. But the liver does not experience alcohol the way the person holding the glass does. To the liver, ethanol is not a social ritual or a relaxing agent. It is a toxin, one that must be identified, converted, and eliminated at significant biological cost. What happens when that toxin is removed? What changes inside the organ when alcohol is absent for 30 consecutive days? The biology of that recovery follows a precise and measurable sequence, one that begins within hours, produces visible physiological changes within days, and results in documented structural improvements within a month. And it reveals in extraordinary detail just how much the liver was carrying, quietly, silently, day after day. Let's begin. What alcohol does to the liver. The biology. To understand what recovery looks like, it is necessary to understand what damage has been taking place. When ethanol enters the bloodstream and reaches the liver, the organ recognizes it as a foreign, toxic compound. Its first response is to metabolize it, to break it down through a specific biochemical pathway in an attempt to render it harmless. The first step in that process involves an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, which converts ethanol into acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is not harmless. It is, in biochemical terms, more toxic than the ethanol from which it is derived. It binds to proteins within liver cells, disrupting their normal function. It forms adducts, compounds that alter the structure of cellular proteins and DNA. It triggers inflammation by activating the liver's resident immune cells, known as Kupffer cells. Acetaldehyde is then converted, in a second metabolic step, into acetate, a comparatively inert compound. But this second conversion requires an enzyme called aldehyde dehydrogenase and generates, as a byproduct, NADH, a molecule that disrupts the liver's normal fat metabolism. Elevated NADH levels shift the liver's metabolic balance. Fat oxidation is suppressed. Fatty acids accumulate within hepatocytes, the liver's primary functional cells, producing what is clinically described as hepatic steatosis, or fatty liver. Research indicates that even moderate regular alcohol consumption can reduce the liver's rate of fat oxidation by over 70% while the ethanol remains present. The gut-liver axis is further compromised. Alcohol loosens the tight junctions between intestinal epithelial cells, allowing bacterial toxins to translocate from the gut into the portal circulation and reach the liver, amplifying the inflammatory response already triggered by acetaldehyde. This is the biological reality that the liver manages silently with every exposure. Hours 1 through 72. Stabilization. The clock begins the moment the last drink is metabolized. Within the first 24 hours of alcohol removal, the liver shifts into what might be described as emergency stabilization mode. On acetaldehyde, the toxic intermediate that accumulates during alcohol metabolism, does not vanish instantly. Its residues linger in tissues and circulation. Detoxification pathways continue working at elevated capacity to process and clear it. Simultaneously, the Kupffer cells, the liver's resident macrophages, begin to reduce their inflammatory signaling. In the absence of continued ethanol and acetaldehyde exposure, the inflammatory triggers that kept these immune cells in a heightened state begin to subside. At the level of the gastrointestinal tract, a significant parallel process begins. Research from Rush University Medical Center has documented that the tight junctions between intestinal epithelial cells begin to close within 24 to 48 hours of alcohol cessation. In the gut barrier, which had been compromised by chronic alcohol exposure, allowing bacterial endotoxins to pass into the portal circulation, begins to reseal. As the gut barrier repairs, the flood of lipopolysaccharides and other bacterial products reaching the liver progressively slows. The liver's inflammatory burden decreases not just from the absence of alcohol itself, but from the reduced input from a healing intestinal tract. The first 72 hours are not characterized by dramatic visible change. They are the period of biological stabilization, the quieting of acute inflammatory processes, and the beginning of the restoration of normal hepatic chemistry. The real structural transformation is still ahead. The body is preparing. The first week, metabolic reset. By the end of the first week, the liver's internal chemistry begins to show measurable shifts, with ethanol no longer present to generate the excessive NADH that had suppressed fat oxidation. The liver's metabolic balance begins to restore. The NADH to NAD ratio normalizes. Fat oxidation pathways, which alcohol had downregulated, begin to reactivate. The liver starts processing fatty acids again as a primary fuel source, rather than accumulating them as intracellular fat. Glucose regulation improves in parallel. Alcohol disrupts gluconeogenesis, the liver's process of synthesizing glucose during fasting states. As ethanol is removed, the liver reclaims its normal role in blood glucose management, stabilizing glycemic fluctuations that were previously amplified by alcoholic interference with hepatic glucose metabolism. And the restoration of intestinal barrier integrity also allows improved nutrient absorption. Chronic alcohol consumption is associated with deficiencies in thiamine, B12, folate, and zinc, nutrients that serve as essential cofactors for enzymatic reactions throughout the body. As gut absorption normalizes, tissue stores of these cofactors begin to replenish, enabling liver enzymes to function at their designed capacity. The liver begins, in this first week, to remember what it was built to do. The enzyme systems that process hormones, neutralize endogenous toxins, and synthesize the proteins the blood carries, albumin, clotting factors, transport proteins, begin to operate with renewed efficiency. The organ is not yet transformed, but the metabolic environment is shifting. And in that shift, the conditions for deeper structural recovery are being established. Week 2, fat release and cellular recovery. By the second week without alcohol, the liver undergoes what researchers describe as one of its most remarkable biological transformations. The process that makes this visible at the tissue level is lipid mobilization. The hepatocytes that had been filled with accumulated fat droplets, the result of suppressed fat oxidation during months or years of regular alcohol consumption, begin releasing those stored lipids. As fat oxidation rates continue to climb, the triglycerides that had been packed into liver cells are processed and cleared. A study conducted by University College London, tracking participants who abstained from alcohol for 30 days during the Dry January campaign, documented average reductions in liver fat content of 15 to 20% within a single month. The process begins to produce measurable structural changes during the second week. As fat content decreases, the physical state of the liver begins to shift. The organ softens. Blood flow through the hepatic tissue improves as the mechanical compression from fat accumulation diminishes. The deep red coloration associated with healthy, well-perfused liver tissue begins to return. The hormone-clearing function of the liver also shows marked improvement. The liver is the primary site of estrogen metabolism. Alcohol upregulates aromatase, the enzyme that converts androgens to estrogens, and impairs hepatic estrogen clearance. As alcohol is removed and liver function improves, estrogen metabolism normalizes. In men, this corresponds to a partial recovery of testosterone levels within approximately 2 weeks of abstinence. The liver is not merely stabilizing, it is actively rebuilding its cellular architecture. What the science shows versus what people believe. There exists a widely shared belief that the liver is an organ of extraordinary tolerance, that moderate, regular alcohol consumption falls safely within its capacity, and that the body simply processes and eliminates it without lasting consequence. The biochemistry of hepatic alcohol metabolism tells a different story. The liver does not have a safe zone threshold below which ethanol is processed without biochemical cost. Every exposure to alcohol initiates the metabolic cascade described above: aldehyde formation, Kupffer cell activation, NADH elevation, fat accumulation, inhibition of fat oxidation. These are not events that occur only with heavy drinking. They occur with every exposure, scaled proportionally to the dose. Another common belief is that fatty liver is only a concern for heavy drinkers. Research indicates otherwise. Alcoholic fatty liver disease, characterized by lipid accumulation within hepatocytes, can develop in individuals who consume what is socially considered moderate amounts of alcohol, particularly with daily or near-daily exposure over months or years. The liver does not broadcast this development. It proceeds silently. The organ does not produce pain signals during early-stage steatosis. A further misconception concerns the body's ability to reset after periods of abstinence. Many believe that periodic breaks from alcohol are sufficient to return the liver to baseline. The documented science shows that this recovery is real and substantial, but its extent depends directly on whether irreversible structural change has yet occurred. Once fibrosis transitions to cirrhosis, where functioning hepatocytes are replaced by scar tissue, the liver's regenerative capacity reaches its limit. The difference between reversible and irreversible damage is not dramatic. It accumulates quietly. 30 days. What the organ has done. By 30 days of alcohol abstinence, the liver has passed through several distinct phases of biological change, from acute stabilization to metabolic reset to structural fat mobilization. The most precisely documented outcome is the reduction in hepatic fat content. The UCL study tracking dry January participants recorded average liver fat reductions of 15 to 20% within the 30-day window. For individuals with early-stage alcoholic fatty liver disease, this change represents a meaningful reversal of pathological accumulation. Liver enzyme levels, ALT and AST, the markers most commonly used in clinical settings to assess hepatocellular damage, typically normalized during this period in individuals who had elevated levels prior to abstinence, reflecting reduced ongoing cellular injury. Systemic markers reflect the change as well. Blood pressure frequently decreases. Inflammatory markers in the blood, including C-reactive protein, decline. Skin quality often improves as the liver's role in managing oxidative stress and clearing metabolic byproducts is restored. And in the absence of alcohol's suppression of antidiuretic hormone, hydration status normalizes. The liver is the only internal organ with full regenerative capacity. Research has documented its ability to regrow from as little as 30% of its original tissue, a biological capacity unmatched by any other major organ. Within 30 days of abstinence, this regenerative machinery is activated, and the trajectory of recovery continues for months beyond the initial window. That recovery, however, depends entirely on whether structural irreversibility has been reached. The organ remembers what it carried. The question is how far that carrying was allowed to go. The body's signals. Reading liver. Distress early, the liver does not produce pain until significant structural damage has occurred. It contains no pain receptors in its parenchymal tissue. Early hepatic distress manifests in a different register through the downstream consequences of impaired liver function visible in other systems. Fatigue that is disproportionate to physical activity or sleep quality can reflect reduced hepatic efficiency in managing metabolic waste, producing bile for nutrient absorption, or maintaining glycogen stores for blood glucose stability. When the liver's energy-regulating role is compromised, systemic energy availability is affected. Hormonal irregularity, in both men and women, can reflect impaired hepatic hormone metabolism. The liver processes estrogens, cortisol, and other steroid hormones. When clearance is inadequate, elevated circulating hormone concentrations produce symptoms that may be attributed to other causes but originate in hepatic function. Digestive disruption, including altered bowel habits, bloating, reduced tolerance of fatty foods, often reflects changes in bile production and secretion. The liver produces approximately 600 to 800 milliliters of bile daily, essential for emulsifying dietary fats. When hepatic function is impaired, bile composition and output are affected, producing digestive consequences. Changes in skin tone, the whites of the eyes, or scleral coloration represent further downstream signals. Reflecting accumulation of bilirubin, a hemoglobin breakdown product that the liver normally processes and excretes. Each of these symptoms is a biological readout of hepatic state. On an understanding what they represent, what organ, what process, what stage of function, transforms them from vague discomforts into precise physiological information. The liver is the body's most quietly resilient organ, and among its most silently burdened ones. What 30 days of abstinence reveals is not merely a list of improving markers. It reveals the scope of what the organ was managing before that window began, the fat it had accumulated, the inflammatory signals it was processing, the hormones it had not fully cleared, the gut toxins it received with every exposure. The body gives signals before systems fail. The biology is precise, and the recovery, where structural damage has not become permanent, is both documented and substantial. Health is not sudden, or it is cumulative in both the damage that accrues and the repair that follows. This channel explores the science behind everyday health topics. And if you want more simple tips to improve your health and mind, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.